I'm tired of the politics on both sides.
I can't believe anything that they say.
We are not getting journalism. We are not serving the public.
Washington works for anyone who can hire an army of lobbyists and lawyers.
The media bias, I guess, just depends on which channel you watch. I think that we need a different point of view.
The media has gone over the top.
They can't stand the truth, but apparently the news media can't stand the truth either.
Congressmen and senators have lots of power, and we know that power corrupts.
Special checks and the winks and nods run Washington.
Two explosions about 15 seconds apart rocked the finish line of the Boston Marathon.
Boston has a disease. The bombing points to a disease that has been growing for 20 years.
When I hear the words Islamic Society of Boston, I think of the greatest threat to Boston citizens that's out there right now.
Afia Siddiqui is an Al-Qaeda operative and facilitator. She attended colleges in the Boston area.
This is a unique situation because we're not talking about crimes here. We're talking about a war.
A 27-year-old Massachusetts man has been charged with conspiring with others on attacks against shoppers in U.S. malls.
Mahana said he would enjoy watching beheadings over watching American Idol.
You're no longer fighting an insurgency.
Intelligence sources say it makes sense that ISIS would want to recruit a guy like American Ahmad Abu Samra.
He used the skills that we gave him here right now for the most brutal, atrocious murders and the most brutal propaganda.
They're quietly radicalizing those kids behind the shield of political correctness.
Isn't that hard to believe that the executives that run law enforcement inside the United States are that uneducated?
Political correctness may be the suicide belt of the Western world. They are here. They are amongst us. They have got a system with tentacles that reach into every American community. It's a real and present danger.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Lori Dew. In November 2013, with the help of a Boston-based nonprofit group, For the Record exposed the history of radicalization in the Boston Muslim community, specifically at the Islamic Society of Boston, or ISB, and its associated mosques. The mosque was founded in 1982 by Abdul Rahman Alamoudi, a man who advised two presidents on Islamic issues. Today, Alamoudi is serving a 23-year prison term on terrorism charges. He is one of 8 members of Boston's Muslim community to be directly connected to terrorism since 2003. And more recently, Ahmad Abu Samra, a man who attended Northeastern University and former member of the ISB, is now suspected of managing propaganda and social media for ISIS. How can one city be such a major center for radicalization and terrorism? Tonight, you'll hear from someone on the inside of this community. Risking his own safety, he exposes the deep secrets in Boston's Muslim community. New information reveals that despite the deadly marathon bombings and documented ties to terrorism, the radical leadership in Boston continues to operate relatively unchecked by law enforcement officials, who continue to place political correctness ahead of public safety. All of this as groups like ISIS are looking to bring the war to the streets of America.
The Tsarnayev brothers lived blocks away from this mosque and attended this mosque and prayed in this mosque. And by the way, they're not the only terrorists who are associated with that mosque. Afia Siddiqui, who is now in jail for decades and decades.
The woman dubbed Lady Al-Qaeda has been convicted of attempted murder of Americans in Afghanistan. Afia Siddiqui was captured in Afghanistan in 2008. Authorities say Siddiqui was caught with plans for a mass casualty attack on New York landmarks.
She was a member of that mosque. Tariq Mahana, who's a man who's also in jail, went to that mosque. And he's in jail because he was plotting to shoot shoppers at a shopping mall in Attleboro, Massachusetts. He went to that mosque. So the Tsarnayev brothers are the third group of people, young Muslim people, who were associated with the mosque that Alamudi built.
Charles Jacobs is the head of Americans for Peace and Tolerance, a nonprofit organization that has been investigating Islamic extremism in the Boston area since 2003.
So what you have here in Boston is a blueprint of how the Muslim Brotherhood and other radicals can penetrate an American community, an established traditional American community, and can pose and be accepted as moderates when they're radicals.
Since we last talked, it's only gotten worse.
Ilya Feoktistov is the director of research for Americans for Peace and Tolerance.
Ever since the 1990s, we've sort of been going on a downward spiral. Boston is very much a hub of extremist activity in the United States, unrivaled by any other city.
In 2009, the Islamic Society of Boston, or ISB, sued Jacobs' group for defamation. The case was eventually dropped. However, that suit allowed Jacobs and his team to collect thousands of documents that exposed the ISB's organizational structure, finances, and connections to international terrorism. These records also revealed a shocking history of radicalization in the Boston Muslim community.
Teaching, indoctrination, recruitment, and the conversion of non-Muslims, these are a major focus of the activity that goes on at the Islamic Society of Boston.
One of the victims of that indoctrination was a man named Tariq Mahana.
Prosecutors in the hearing today said Mahana is a threat, that he told investigators he'd rather go out in a blaze of glory than go to prison.
In 2012, Mahana was sentenced to more than 17 years in prison for conspiracy to provide material support to terrorism. His co-conspirator in a Mumbai-style plot to shoot up a Boston-area shopping mall was another former ISB member who recently resurfaced in the American media.
The FBI's focus is intensifying on 32-year-old Ahmad Abu Samra.
He grew up near Boston, holds both a Syrian and U.S. passport, and graduated from Northeastern University in Boston with a degree in the field of computer technology.
Ahmad Abu Samra heads the ISIS social media strategy. That is a very major role in this terrorist organization that should not be underestimated. We should not underestimate just how valuable this man who grew up in Boston is to the entire ISIS enterprise. He used the skills that we gave him here right now for the most brutal and atrocious murders and the most brutal propaganda.
Perhaps more troubling is the fact that for decades, Abu Samra's father was considered a prominent leader in Boston's Muslim community.
Abu Samra's father was vice president of the Muslim American Society, which runs the daily operations of the largest mosque on the Eastern Seaboard here in Boston.
The Muslim American Society has been identified by federal prosecutors in a terrorism case as the overt arm of the Muslim Brotherhood in America. The Muslim Brotherhood is the fount of modern jihadist ideology. It is the group out of which Al-Qaeda grew, out of which ISIS grew.
Abdul Badi Abu Samra also served as the president for the Islamic Center of New England, also known as ICNE, where he founded 2 schools.
In fact, he's still the president of the Muslim elementary school in the Boston area, the Islamic Academy of New England. And he personally hired a man by the name of Hafiz Masood, who is now the spokesman of the Pakistani terrorist organization, Jamaat-ud-Dawa.
The State Department designated Jamaat-ud-Dawa as a foreign terrorist organization in June 2014. The group was a spin-off from another Pakistani terror group called Lashkar-e-Taiba, which was responsible for the horrific Mumbai terror attacks of 2008, which killed 166 people. Both groups were founded by the Boston Imam's brother, Hafiz Saeed.
It's not a strange thing to figure out why Tariq Mahana and Ahmed Abu Samra had in their minds to go up to Attleboro and at the Emerald shopping mall and to machine gun people. That was what happened in Mumbai.
In 2009, the Times of India reported that the man Abu Samra hired to teach at his school, Hafiz Masood, was using his status as an imam in Massachusetts to raise funds and recruit young Muslims for jihad.
Along with Tariq Mahana and Ahmed Abu Samra, multiple other youths were radicalized, including Imam Masood's own son. According to our sources in the Muslim community, they would meet and hold what are called halakas, which are basically intensive sessions of lecture, preaching, praying, that would go on late into the night, in fact, sometimes all night. Hafiz Masood, during these sessions with his most close students, would discuss issues of jihad and Islamic extremist theology.
Several members of Boston's Muslim community tried to speak out against Masood. These emails obtained by Americans for Peace and Tolerance show their concerns dating back to 2006.
We have heard from moderate Muslim community members that some kids have told them that they went to these sessions and that they're never going back again. When asked why, they said, because it's a cult. We don't want to be a part of a cult.
Little man, your choice today is to make your father proud of you.
This is a curse that will continue operating in Boston in a secret way. This is a secret cult and they are after power and money. And it has very little to do with Islam.
A member of Boston's Muslim community, who we'll call Khalid, agreed to meet with For the Record producers and be interviewed. However, his voice and appearance have been altered out of fear of retribution.
I learned about these people from defectors. They told me things and I took a closer look at who they were. I would have not wanted to stay in America if I would have known what kind of goons would come and capture the young people. But I was able to keep my child away from these people.
They're here, they're among us, and they're growing, and they're quietly teaching their youth, Muslim youth of Boston, which had a historically moderate Muslim community. They're quietly radicalizing those kids behind the shield of political correctness that the media and the rest of liberal society allows them to have.
Abdulbari Abu Samra fled the U.S. in 2012 after the FBI placed a $50,000 bounty on his son's head. Hafiz Masood was deported on visa fraud charges in 2009. Before his deportation, Boston's Muslim American Society held a rally to support him. When we return, the disconnect between moderate Muslims and law enforcement, and how that misunderstanding could ultimately lead to more attacks on American soil.
The problem we're facing, and I think the majority of America feels this way, is that the leaders in the Muslim community are not speaking out enough against terrorism.
Steve Rogers is a former naval intelligence officer who served on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force from 2003 to 2005.
And the leaders of these mosques, they have to understand something. They're Americans. This is their country. They need to be loyal to America.
But for many Muslims living in the U.S., loyalty to America can be a difficult and sometimes dangerous choice.
If any one of them came and was an outspoken person, either in their community or to the press, and he were identified, he would face really serious threats.
People are scared. People withdraw. If they do something against the leadership, one email is sent out to the entire community. And they say, this guy is bad. You must have nothing to do with him.
Abdulbari Abu Samra would bring a convict who converted in jail around the Islamic Center of New England and would use him to threaten and physically assault moderate Muslims who resisted Abu Samra's radicalism.
They are very good at controlling the people and the community. They know everything that goes on and they make sure people don't get out of line.
Emails obtained by Americans for Peace and Tolerance show how leaders in the community try to silence other Muslims from speaking out.
To think that the majority of Muslims want one caliphate is wrong. It is not true. The people who say they want a caliphate is a very small minority, and that minority is disconnected from most Muslims. The minority is a fascist, criminal organization which poses itself as an Islamic institution.
But the reality is, if we looked at the big picture of who we're fighting and the tactics that they use, which if you look at the Al-Qaeda training manual, it is 100% criminal behavior.
Jonathan Gillam is a former Navy SEAL. From 2005 to 2013, Gillam served as a special agent with the FBI based in New York City.
They don't subscribe to our laws. They subscribe to their laws of the Quran. And that has nothing to do with, our Constitution.
We're talking about a war. We are at war, or may I say that the terrorists are at war with us.
Khalid says the core issue for moderate Muslims is the battle over their ideology, and the moderates aren't winning.
The disease in Boston is not genetic. It is caused by people who practice Islam according to the teachings of the violent Muslim Brotherhood. These followers believe they and only they have the divine right to interpret and practice Islam, and all others need to be reprogrammed.
The reprogramming is the basis of radicalization. It's a process that typically takes years and is usually rooted in an education system that begins at an early age in schools such as the Islamic Academy of New England.
The problem is the radicalization of the historically moderate Muslim population in America. And we think that the Muslim Brotherhood is here primarily targeting moderate Muslim youth. They want to own them. They want to brainwash them and recruit them.
As they progress towards more and more radicalization, they start believing that democracy is a satanic system and should be overthrown in favor of an Islamic state.
I sympathize with Tariq Mahana's father. He is a good guy. He is a professor of pharmacy at the college. He thought he was being a good father and sent his son to the mosque. When his son was out in the evening, he would ask, "Where have you been?" And his son would say, "He was at the mosque." His father thinks that's good because he's not out doing bad things. But he doesn't know until he loses his son what was happening to him. And who are the people responsible? The leaders of ICNE and the ISB are responsible for the intellectual murder of his son.
In Boston, the FBI has made outreach a major priority, and that means sometimes working with leaders from the ISB or the ICNE, mosques with multiple connections to terrorism.
The beat cops, the regular FBI agents very much understand this and get this. What we see, unfortunately, on the other hand, is that the leadership does not understand or get this at all, and in fact does not want to know these things out of political reasons, out of political correctness.
Americans for Peace and Tolerance has briefed federal law enforcement officials as early as 2009 on the threat groups like the ISB pose to the Boston community. But Jacob says law enforcement leaders are unwilling to make the connection between religious ideology and criminal activity.
They won't allow themselves to think the thought that there's a connection between a man's religious convictions and what he's about to do.
On March 6, 2010, ISB leader Abdullah Farouk gave a sermon in support of convicted Boston terrorist Afia Siddiqui, where he urged Muslims to do whatever is necessary to further the cause of Allah.
You must grab onto this rope, grab onto the typewriter, grab onto the shovel, grab onto the gun and the sword. Don't be afraid to step out into this world and do your job.
2 months later, at a ceremony involving high-level Massachusetts officials, Farouk awarded the state with $50,000 to conduct Muslim sensitivity training for law enforcement officers.
That $50,000 was awarded by Imam Abdullah Farouk at a ceremony that featured Governor Deval Patrick.
The ceremony also featured Massachusetts Deputy Attorney General Maura Healey, who designed the sensitivity training. Healey is up for election in November 2014, seeking to become the state's top law enforcement official as the next Attorney General.
Isn't that hard to believe that the executives that run law enforcement inside the United States are that uneducated?
Boston is not unique in using outreach as a major tool in the war on terrorism. However, many branches of law enforcement have failed to distinguish the moderates from the radicals. For example, on September 24, 2014, the Council on American Islamic Relations, known as CARE, conducted day-long seminars for local law enforcement on how to conduct outreach to the Somali community in Minneapolis. The seminar was co-sponsored by the Abu Bakr as-Siddiqui Mosque. A 2013 For the Record episode called Minnesota Martyrs revealed that multiple attendees of the mosque have joined al-Qaeda affiliates in the Middle East. CARE was permitted to sponsor the event, even though the FBI stopped working with CARE as an outreach partner in 2008 due to the group's direct ties to funding terrorism.
We have no formal relationship with CARE because of concerns with regard to the national leadership.
Training, reaching out to communities is fine. But how is it that you can justify reaching out to CARE, which I personally believe is a propaganda machine?
They either don't understand the reality of the big picture enemy that we're fighting, or they are gambling with our safety.
On September 26, 2014, the Los Angeles Times reported that the Department of Justice will soon announce a broad new policy that will ban federal agents from profiling suspects on the basis of religion. Citing internal DOJ sources, the report says the new policy will extend long-standing prohibitions on profiling to national security investigations, potentially banning agents from using surveillance and other tactics to investigate criminal activity in the Muslim community.
People are defining what the police do, especially on a local level, as racial profiling. But it's criminal profiling, and in this case, there's a necessity for that.
Profiling is not a racial issue. Profiling is a technique that puts all things in place.
What they do is they get a totality of intelligence information, whether it be on an organization or an individual, and then they begin to profile based on that information. It has nothing to do with race.
I do not believe the police, the agencies are stupid. They are not dumb. They have the wrong education. They do not know the truth because the imams, leaders, they are looking to them for the truth. But they are the criminal leaders who hide behind Islam. If that is where you go, how can you expect to know who is good or bad?
The end of the story here could be very tragic, not for the White House, not for Congress, but for those poor police officers, those hardworking, courageous cops who are going to go out there into battle, not on the fields of Iraq, not on the fields of Syria, but on the fields and on the streets of America.
Welcome back. For the Record has sent multiple requests to FBI officials in Washington and Boston for comment on the issues presented in tonight's episode. If we get responses from any of them, we'll add that to our show page at theblaze.com/fortherecord. And that's our show for this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Lori Dew, and we'll see you again next week on For the Record.